Hi, this is Norbert Herber from Indiana University and GQ Audio. Today I want to talk about seamless loops for games and mediated environments. For starters, that title says a lot, so let's unpack it to be sure we're ready to go forward together. Seamless means smooth and continuous. There is no evidence that more than one piece of material has been used to construct a single object. A loop is a recording of music, an environment, or other sound that you play with continuous repetitions. In fact, you've probably noticed that one is playing right now in the background. And if you understand games, you understand mediated environments. I use these terms broadly to include any situation where a media technology takes you out of your day-to-day experiences and offers something new. Peggle on the bus, Instagram at lunch, an art gallery after work. Much of the applications we use on our devices are instances of mediated environments. Not all make use of audio, but those that do invariably make use of loops. Which takes us back to this. That loop has been playing the entire time. How does that make you feel? Now, please tell me. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate your pain? In movies and television, where the experience has been sequenced and has a fixed duration, loops aren't necessary. Hire a composer or license music and edit it to suit your needs and you're done. If your film is 83 minutes long, you will always need exactly 83 minutes of audio. In games, it's uncertain how much music is needed because one person may beat a level in just a few minutes, while another needs multiple attempts. Art installations often invite visitors to linger as long as they like. By virtue of their participation, players and visitors have a role in shaping their experience, and we as creators and developers can only plan for possibilities. Loops provide an easy contingency. They cycle indefinitely and can cover any length of time that's needed. So loops are a great solution, but if not used effectively, they can create more problems than they help solve. Consider this clip from The Matrix.
Deja vu.
What did you just say?
Nothing, just had a little deja vu.
What did you see?
What happened?
A black cat went past us, and then another that looked just like it.
How much like it? Was it the same cat?
Might have been, I'm not sure.
Switch, APOC.
What is it?
A deja vu is usually a glitch in the Matrix. It happens when they change something.
This clip is about the perception and mechanics of reality. Everyone depicted here is fully aware that the world they experience is no more than an elaborate computer program that has overtaken the consciousness of the human race. With the exception of Neo, Trinity, and a few other characters in the scene, every human is unknowingly and permanently connected to a vast network of machines known as the Matrix. Terms like suspension of disbelief and immersion don't apply to those who are under its control. The Matrix is completely mediated. It is the only reality they know. Neo and Trinity have a different connection to the Matrix. They are aware of its mediating process and enter into it freely. When they experience something like a deja vu, they become aware of the system's operation. A glitch in the Matrix draws attention to itself and reveals its own functioning from within. Those of us who experience games and mediated environments are in a position similar to that of Neo and Trinity. We enter into various mediated realities to experience a shift of consciousness, a new reality facilitated by the game, the artwork, or the environment. And like Neo's deja vu, those events that repeat in uncanny ways call our attention to the processes of mediation. When we create loops, or select audio that we intend to play as a loop, there are a number of techniques and best practices that allow us to extend music or a sound environment indefinitely over time while avoiding deja vu-like glitches. So the first example that we'll look at are some things that you want to watch out for or listen for when you're creating loops. Students will often come to me and say, I created a loop, but it just doesn't sound right. And oftentimes they don't know why. It's generally one of a few different things. And I've got a couple examples here that will show you some different things to, like I said, to watch for and some things to listen for in the loops that you create. The first, and probably the most obvious to your ears, are snaps and pops. Listen to this file. Did you hear that? If you watch when the playback needle gets to the end here and loops back to the beginning, you'll hear a clear snap. Yeah, that happens because the ends of the loop just simply don't line up. The wave ends over here at a position that is not the same as it is over on this end of the file. And when that happens, it manifests as a snap or a pop or some sort of distorted effect. Just to give you an idea of what that looks like, I'll zoom in all the way. And you can see here, the left channel ends about 12 dB below 0, which is this red line. The right channel actually ends right at 0, which is what you want for a loop. But if we look at the beginning of the file, here we are back at the beginning. The left channel is slightly above 0, and the right channel is also above 0. And that discrepancy between being above 0 here and below 0 on this end, or in the case of the right channel, at 0 here at the end, and above 0 here at the beginning of the file. When we play the whole thing back, it's perfectly smooth as it plays through the loop. But again, as soon as we get to the end and it cycles back to the beginning, we'll hear that snap. Yeah, and that's something we just don't want at all in our loops. The next thing are texture differences. It's probably easier for you to just hear this than for me to try to describe it. You'll notice that when this loop cycles, there is a big difference between what you hear at the beginning of the loop and what you hear at the end. Did you hear that? When the loop cycled around, the background noise in this environmental recording had a different texture. There must be some low-frequency sounds that were here in the recording at this section. They finished playing when they got to this part. But of course, when the loop cycles around, you're immediately jumping from this end to that end. And because of those textural differences, you're going to hear that. And it's a big change, and it can be really disruptive as you're playing through the loop, because you'll hear that shift of timbre or texture every time the loop cycles around. And this is a short file. This is only about, I don't know, 10 and a half, 11 seconds. But you would still hear that even if it was a longer file, because the differences between the end and the beginning are so drastic. Another loop characteristic related to texture differences are repetitive features. Here's another sample from that same recording we just listened to. So you can hear some city ambience, rumble of traffic, some industrial sounds, horn honks, and a dog barks. Well, as I let this loop, you can hear what I mean by repetitive features. Those sounds that really stick out of this texture, the bang on the metal, the horn honk, and the dog barking happen every single time. And if we were to let this sound loop over a long period of time, every time we hear that horn and we hear that dog, it's going to draw our attention to the fact that this is looping. Of all the examples we listened to so far, this is the one that's most like the deja vu in the Matrix, where what we hear is literally the same thing that we heard just a few seconds earlier. And that's something you have to avoid if you want your loops to seem smooth and continuous like our experience of reality. The last one is a riff or a hook. You probably recognize this file from the intro to the video. And as a music file, that's fine. And it loops and it has a good groove and it's catchy. But that's the problem, is that it's catchy. It has that characteristic of a hook where it grabs your attention. And it's that characteristic in and of itself that makes it difficult to use as a loop because our ears latch onto it. We recognize what it is, we can make sense of it quickly, it appeals to us. But then when it loops without changing at all, it becomes tiresome. It really wears us down. Even though we might like it for a brief moment as a piece of music, it really starts to become tiresome on our ears. Now, we can take a look at some specific techniques for how to create loops that avoid some of these problems we've looked at. The first example I want to show you is an environmental loop, and we're going to create it here in Pro Tools. If we listen to the sound that's loaded in this session, you can hear that we have insects, some distant birds, and some birds that are really close by. Now if we listen to the end of the file, you can hear it just kind of fades out, and if this were to loop back to the very beginning, there's a bit of a fade in there before we actually get to the main section of the recording. And as we know from our examples, if we were to loop this as is right now, we'd have an abrupt textural change from the end section to the beginning, not to mention a huge shift of volume because there's a subtle fade in here in this section. So in order to get around this, there's some pretty clever and fairly easy editing that we can do in order to create a loop but avoid some of these areas that are going to draw attention to themselves. The first thing I'll do is just select a section of the audio file that's in an area where there's not a lot of activity. This area should be fine. Click there to make a selection and then zoom in. And what I'm looking for particularly is an area where there's a zero crossing. It's really hard to see because this file is so quiet, but I think I'll just drop my cursor at a 0. Right there. And it's really hard to tell if it's a zero crossing. Maybe if I go right there, that's a little bit more convincing. The truth of the matter is that it doesn't matter a whole lot. I just always like to put it at a zero crossing to be absolutely sure I don't introduce any snaps or pops or weird artifacts that we heard in some of those examples that we listened to earlier. Now, once you've got your edit point selected, you just separate these regions. So I press Command E to separate that main audio region into two sections. Then we have to set this up so that we can loop smoothly from one end of the audio file to the next. And this is where this seamless loop technique is so handy. We will create a new track, and it can be the same as the other, so we'll just make it a stereo audio track. And then what we'll do is take the end of the audio file and drag it all the way to the beginning. Then we'll take the top track and drag it slightly over there to the right in time. I know this looks weird, but what we've done sets us up to create a seamless loop. This end becomes the new end of the looped audio file. When it finishes its playback, it will automatically jump back to the beginning. Well, when it gets there, there's nothing on this track, but here we have the section that was previously connected to this audio file right over there. Let me undo, and you can see, yeah, remember, it was right up there. But by moving things back in this order, we now set ourselves up to have a completely smooth loop, because this will transition perfectly from there to there. And if we play this back in loop mode here in Pro Tools, it's going to take us the whole time to play through this, which is just about a minute long. A lot of times when you're working on this, you probably don't have a full minute to listen to the whole thing. You just want to know if the loop point is smooth. Pro Tools has a great feature that allows you to check that out. If you go under Options, you can choose this, make the selection for Dynamic Transport. And with Dynamic Transport, you can just click in this little area that pops up here under the timecode section. Click, and it gives you this little blue triangle, and that will automatically start playback from that point. So when we play, we can listen immediately to how the loop transitions from the end to the beginning of this newly edited audio file. And it's perfectly smooth because those two were originally connected. The next thing we have to do is address the area where the one file is overlapping the other. And you can hear there's kind of a weird gap there. You can see it a little bit when you look at the waveform too. We know that this starts with a bit of a fade, so there's starts from silence and gradually goes up to a low volume. Here, there actually looks like there's a bit of a crescendo or some gain in volume. And this is where it's really just a matter of introducing some fades. You can use the fade tool and introduce a fade there. This already has a fade from the original file, but if you wanted to be absolutely sure, you could introduce a fade there. Let's listen to that. Oh, and it started in Dynamic Transport, which we don't really need when we're testing this. We'll switch that off and listen from here. And that works out, and it's pretty smooth. It's still not perfect, and you can spend as much time as you need to fine-tuning these fades. Sometimes it falls into place right away. Other times it takes a little bit of adjusting. It completely depends upon the material that you're working with. Man, that's even still a little too much. We'll fade that out a little bit more aggressively. And there we have it. Perfectly smooth. We don't notice a transition as we go across this region to this region. And as we heard with the edits that we made, we have a perfectly smooth loop from this point to this point. The next step in Pro Tools is to just simply select both of these things, choose File, bounce to Disk, select the format that you need. This was originally a CD quality WAV file, stereo, so I'll keep interleaved, 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz WAV file, give it a name, click on Bounce, and Pro Tools renders the file. And with that final file that we've bounced from Pro Tools, we'll have something that we can put into a game engine, drop it into a video timeline, bring it back into Pro Tools, bring it back into any audio application for that matter, and it will always loop smoothly. This next example will also show you how to create a seamless loop. I'm going to use the same technique that you just saw where I used Pro Tools to create a seamless loop using an environmental recording. Here I'm working in Adobe Audition, and I'm going to work with a track of ambient music. The approach will be exactly the same. I just wanted to do a demo with a different piece of software and also some slightly different material. As you can see, this waveform has a lot more going on. It's a richer, fuller recording than what we were listening to before, but could sit in the background and loop continuously behind a game or any other kind of experience that we wanted to create. We will work in Audition using the exact same techniques. I have to bounce between a couple different modes here just given the way that Audition works, but it's not all that difficult to do. So the first thing I want is to look and listen for a section where there's not a lot of activity. Well, this file has constant layers that are moving and evolving over each other. I'm going to go ahead and just jump right here where there's kind of a pause between those two phrases that we hear. And then zoom in. Why do we zoom in so much? Well, we need to find a zero crossing. Why do we find the zero crossing? Well, as you remember from the example that we listened to earlier, when a loop file doesn't begin and end at a zero crossing, that's when you can end up with snaps and pops and other kinds of artifacts. And, in this technique, you may think, well, wait a second, it doesn't matter. When we cut this loop, one end is always going to connect with the other, and it will be seamless by definition. And that's true. It will be seamless. But I always like to start these loop points at a zero crossing just to be absolutely sure there's no chance that you have any sort of pop or snap. Now, finding these in Audition is just a matter of trial and error. I'm scanning through the audio file right now, and I'm looking for a place where both the left channel and the right channel cross zero at the same time, meaning that this line of samples and this line of samples cross that red line at exactly the same time. I'm going to go searching now. Wish me luck. There we go. Finally found it. It takes a while. But there's always a place where you can find where both the right channel and the left channel cross this red zero line at the exact same time. Now that I've found that, I can use the edit menu and add a cue marker here. That will mark this spot so that I know where I need to cut and make my edit a little bit later on. Next thing I'll do is simply right click over here and say that I want to insert this into a new multi-track session. Doesn't really matter what name you gave it. You can keep the settings that are consistent with the audio file that you're working with right now. This is also a CD quality stereo file, so I'll stick with that. And I'll give it the name Seamless Loop. Now, when I do that, it switches modes, and Audition leaves the single track editor and moves into the multi-track editor. It starts to look a little bit more like Pro Tools in this case. And we will work right now in a way that's exactly like what we did in Pro Tools. What's helpful about starting in the other editor is that now we have a line where we found our zero crossing. So I will drop the playback head right on top of that marker. Use these little shuttle controls and zoom in on that spot so I can see it very, very closely. Use the plus sign to zoom in even more. And then grab the razor blade tool and then just click right on top. Oh, that's the playback needle. That's not what I want. I want my marker. There it is. Yeah, want to make sure that we cut on the marker, not on the playback needle. Snip it right there. And that separates this audio file into two separate chunks here in Audition. You can see it better if I zoom out. Now you can see we have a section here on the right and a section over there on the left. And just like we did in the last example, we're going to take what was the end of the file and move it over here to the beginning. Take the old beginning of the file, move it over here to the end. And some of you who have done crossfades before may ask, well, wait a second, why don't you just put it on the same track and have a crossfade like this? It's true, there's nothing wrong with that. We could do that. You can listen to it. And you can hear we move from one file to the next. But the reason why I don't like to do it this way is that I can't see what's happening in the other audio file there. And a lot of times the editing that you do for this technique is visual as much as it is oral. I really rely on looking at the shape of the waveform, seeing the shape of the fade that I create, and considering how all of that interacts as I listen to it to be sure that this transition is as smooth as it possibly can be. So I like to work with two tracks like this for those reasons. And again, we've got a long natural decay on this sound file, so I don't need to do much with fading this track out, but this starts at a pretty high volume, so I do need to be more aggressive with my fade here. Exactly what that shape should be, I'm not sure. Let's just listen to this and hear how this transition works. It's a little abrupt. I'm going to try a slightly different shape. And that's good. Just a little earlier so those phrases make more sense as one flows into the next. Right, so now we have a smooth edit across these regions. The next thing that we would want to test is whether or not this sound is going to work well as it plays and loops from this end to this end. The problem is that Audition can't do this. You heard it both times. One time it cut it off completely, the other time it introduced a little snap or a skip. Audition just can't play a sound file end to end smoothly when it's in multi-track editing mode like this. It's unfortunate, but it's just the way it is, and there's an easy workaround. You simply go to the File menu, say that you want to export a multi-track mixdown, and you're going to export your entire session, everything that we've been working with so far. It gives it a helpful name, which is the name of the file followed by _ mixdown. So it keeps a reference to the file that you originally created. You know that it's a mixdown version. It keeps all your sample settings exactly the same. So we click OK. It renders that, and it gives us a new file. If I double click that, it will open it over here. We're back in the original Audition editor. We can listen to this, and more importantly, we can start at the end and listen to hear how this loop sounds when it goes from end to end. And it's perfectly smooth. Exactly what we would expect. Knowing that the end of the file, or what's now the end, was originally attached to what's now the beginning, lets us know that it's going to be perfectly smooth every time it loops. And again, this file is now a standalone audio file. Drop this into Wise, drop this into Fmod, drop this into Construct, drop it into Unity, any game engine, put it into a buffer in Max MSP. It's now completely portable as a sound file and can be played back and will loop seamlessly within game engines and other software that you might be using. This last example I want to look at is for creating rhythmic loops. Now, we listened to this example earlier and we talked about some of the things that work and things that don't work with this loop. Whether or not that's going to work for your particular application, there are certain times when you need to use things that have rhythmic components like this. If you take longer sections of music, take an entire AABA section of a song and loop that, you can get really good results. Start thinking about how to break out individual tracks and loop them for adaptive audio applications. There's lots of things that you might need or want to do that require creating a rhythmic loop. Well, with a program like this, Reason, it's really, really easy to create these kinds of loops. You can simply use these loop markers that are in the program, make a selection over the part that you want, and then export that as a loop. So if I just grab 2 bars here from the middle of the A section, we've got a loop that would sound something like this. And you may wonder, well, wait a second, why didn't you start the loop from the beginning? You're starting it at the second bar rather than the first bar. Well, the reason is that with rhythmic loops, oftentimes there are sounds that carry over from the end of the loop, and they should go through to the beginning. Reverb tails, taps in a delay line, cymbal crashes, anything like that. And a lot of times, if you start the loop from the beginning, so if I set the loop up to go from bar 1 to bar 3, and I take the first 2 bars, when the loop happens, bar 1 may sound a little naked or exposed or just off in some way because it doesn't have those sounds that carry over from the previous measure. So chopping a loop from the middle of the section can actually give you a better result. When you do that, you make your selection, go to File, choose Export Loop as audio file. Give it a name. Choose your settings, and you'll have that loop set aside for you. Open it up in a different program, and you can hear what it sounds like. And it loops, and it sounds exactly the way we'd expect it to. We can do that same section, just highlight this guitar part for the bridge. Command L will tell Reason that you automatically want to loop that section. And we can do the same thing that we did before. File, Export Loop as audio file. We'll call this one Loop Bridge. File settings, whatever you need for your application. Click Export, and you've got another looped file. With rhythmic loops, there are a number of other considerations, and rather than go into those now, I want to refer you to another tutorial by Play.Sound. They produced this tutorial a while back. They talk a lot more about some of the nuances and subtleties of working with rhythmic loops. They cover that information really well, so rather than me continue on here, I just want to send you over to their lesson, and you can hear how they talk about handling reverb tails and all sorts of other things that you might encounter when working with rhythmic loops. So there you have it. Several techniques that will allow you to loop audio for games or mediated environments where you need a continuous sonic backdrop that will play for an indefinite period of time without any sort of disruption or gap or anything that draws attention to itself or breaks your users, your players, your audience out of that sense of immersion or the experience that you're trying to create for them. I'm Norbert Herber with GQ Audio. Thank you so much.